I always thought the most dangerous place I would ever stand was a hostile combat zone in Afghanistan, using my bare hands to pry open a burning Humvee. I was completely wrong. The ultimate betrayal did not come from enemy fire. It came years later, at a pristine suburban barbecue, from my own sister. She did not just mock the mangled, burned scar on my arm, the very scar that saved 3 young soldiers' lives. She was using that fake, perfect smile to hide a $50,000 secret. A secret bought with my combat hazard pay, and a secret my entire family helped her bury. When my Navy SEAL brother-in-law finally stood up and silenced the whole patio, he had no idea he was pulling the pin on a grenade that would absolutely destroy our family's fake empire forever. This is the story of how I uncovered the ultimate financial betrayal, and exactly how I walked away to build an untouchable life. Because sometimes, the hardest battle isn't surviving the war, it's surviving the people you came home to, and realizing that your strength is not a free resource for toxic family members to endlessly exploit. If you have ever been the invisible, unappreciated backbone of your family, please hit that like button. Share this story with someone who desperately needs to hear it. And subscribe to the channel to join a powerful community of women reclaiming their worth. Drop a comment below and let me know, have you ever had to draw a hard line with your own blood? I always thought the hardest battlefield I would ever walk away from was in the suffocating dust of Afghanistan. I was wrong. The most dangerous ground I ever navigated was a manicured lawn in the affluent suburbs of Ohio, smelling of expensive cedarwood smoke, grilled ribeyes, and perfectly curated lies. I was 38 years old, a major in the United States Army, and I had just been invited to my older sister's summer barbecue. I should have known better than to attend, but the heavy, suffocating chain of family obligation has a way of dragging you back to places you do not belong. The afternoon sun was relentless, beating down on the sprawling patio of Chloe's 6-bedroom colonial home. Chloe was holding court by the outdoor kitchen, swirling a generous pour of imported Cabernet in an oversized crystal glass. She wore a pristine white linen sundress, looking every bit the flawless suburban queen she had spent the last decade pretending to be. Beside her stood our younger brother, Jason. Jason was 35, drowning in credit card debt to maintain a luxury lifestyle. Yet he carried himself with the unearned arrogance of a self-made billionaire. Then there was Marcus, Chloe's husband. Marcus was a retired Navy SEAL, a man constructed of quiet, lethal gravity. He stood near the Weber grill, expertly turning steaks, his eyes hidden behind dark aviator sunglasses. He rarely spoke at these gatherings, existing more as an observer to the chaotic narcissism of my family. I sat at the edge of the teakwood dining table, my hands resting in my lap. I was wearing a simple, sleeveless blouse because the mid-July heat was unbearable. That was my first tactical error. My left arm rested against the smooth wood of the table, exposing the thick, jagged ridges of a massive scar that ran from my elbow down to my wrist. The scar was an ugly, twisted map of burned and reconstructed tissue. It was the physical receipt of a day in a remote province where I had used that bare, bleeding hand to pry open the crushed door of a burning Humvee, dragging 3 19-year-old soldiers into the dirt just before the fuel tank detonated. It was a badge of survival, a testament to the fragile line between life and death. Jesus, Sarah. Jason's voice cut sharply through the hum of the patio conversation, loud enough to stop the ambient chatter of the neighborhood guests. Could you at least try to cover up that mangled meat? People are trying to eat here. The air on the patio seemed to instantly evaporate. A few guests nervously looked away, shifting their weight. I felt the familiar, dull ache in my knuckles as my jaw locked. I did not immediately respond. You do not survive a combat zone by reacting blindly to enemy fire. You assess and calculate. I looked at Jason, noting the cruel, satisfied smirk playing on his lips. He loved tearing me down. Stripping away my dignity was his favorite method of making his own hollow life feel significant. Before I could even process a response, Chloe chimed in, letting out a long, theatrical sigh as she walked over to the table. He is not wrong. Sarah, she said, her voice dripping with a sickeningly sweet condescension. I mean, I know you went through a lot over there, but you are ruining the entire aesthetic of the party. It is just a little jarring for the guests. Would it kill you to wear a cardigan? You are always so desperate for attention. The sheer audacity of her words paralyzed me. To my own blood, the sacrifice that defined my existence was nothing more than an inconvenience, an ugly blemish on her perfect Sunday afternoon. They did not see the lives saved. They only saw flesh that offended their delicate sensibilities. I took a slow, deep breath, preparing to stand up, grab my keys, and walk away from this toxic theater forever. Then, the heavy clack of stainless steel tongs hitting the granite countertop echoed like a gunshot. Marcus turned away from the grill. He did not yell. He did not wave his arms. He simply walked toward the table with a terrifying, deliberate slowness that instantly drained the arrogance from Jason's face. Marcus stopped directly behind Chloe. He reached up, slowly removing his aviator sunglasses, revealing eyes that were cold, sharp, and utterly devoid of mercy. He bypassed his wife entirely and locked his gaze onto my brother. That scar, Marcus said, his voice dropping to a low, gravelly rumble that vibrated right through the teakwood table, is the exact reason 3 young men went home to their mothers instead of coming back in flag-draped boxes. It is the mark of someone who actually understands what it costs to keep this world spinning. Marcus finally turned his head to look at Chloe, the color rapidly draining from her pristine, makeup-covered cheeks. If anyone here is ruining the view, he continued, his tone absolute ice, it is the people standing on this patio who have never earned the right to breathe the same air as her. Anyone at this table who talks trash about that arm does not know the first damn thing about honor. The execution was flawless. Jason visibly shrank, pulling his shoulders in like a scolded child, absolutely terrified of the man standing before him. Chloe's mouth opened and closed in shock, her hand shaking so violently that a splash of red wine spilled over the rim of her glass, staining her white dress like a fresh wound. I did not smile. I did not feel the triumphant rush of vindication. I simply felt a profound, heavy heartbreak. I looked at Marcus and gave him a single, silent nod of profound respect. I stood up, squared my shoulders, and walked across the immaculate stone path, pushing the cedar gate open. I left them standing in the absolute ruin of their own fake empire, completely unaware that this was only the beginning of the war. The heavy emotional hangover from the barbecue lingered in my chest for days, a cold, dark anchor that refused to be lifted. Cutting ties with your family does not feel like a sudden liberation. It feels like standing in a freezing, empty room where a fire used to burn. You mourn the warmth you were supposed to have while staring at the ashes of what was actually there. By Wednesday, I needed a distraction. I needed a tactical objective to keep my mind from spiraling into the dark abyss of Chloe and Jason's cruelty. My father, Thomas, had asked me a week prior to help him sort through the chaotic filing cabinets in his home office. He was getting older, his memory slipping into frustrating fragments, and the mountains of paperwork were becoming a genuine hazard. I parked my truck in my parents' driveway, the quiet, middle-class neighborhood feeling worlds away from Chloe's sprawling estate. My mother, Eleanor, greeted me at the door with a tense, fleeting smile. She had heard about the barbecue. Of course, in our family, gossip traveled faster than light, but true accountability moved at a glacial pace. We did not discuss it. She simply offered me a cup of lukewarm coffee and pointed me toward the dusty den at the back of the house. The office smelled of stale paper, old ink, and the distinct, musty scent of a life boxed away in cardboard. I spent 3 hours methodically organizing utility bills, old tax returns, and faded warranties. It was mindless, rhythmic work, exactly the kind of repetitive task my brain craved. I was working my way through a heavy, reinforced bottom drawer labeled Medical 2021 when my fingers brushed against a thick manila folder. 5 years ago, This family had faced a genuine crisis. Dad needed a quadruple bypass surgery, an emergency procedure that the doctors said could not wait. I was stationed in a concrete bunker overseas when the crackling satellite phone rang. It was Chloe, hysterical and sobbing. She claimed Dad's insurance was garbage, that the hospital demanded $50,000 out of pocket before they would even schedule an operating room. She told me she could not liquidate her assets, that her boutique business was tied up in inventory. I was the single sister with the combat hazard pay. I did not hesitate. I contacted a military trust lawyer in Washington, D.C., and wired every single dime I had saved from bleeding in the sand to a blind account to pay the hospital. Dad survived, and Chloe spent the next 5 years taking the credit, telling the extended family she had tirelessly rallied a private charity to save our father's life. I opened the Manila folder, intending to just file it alphabetically. Inside was a stack of official documents from Medicare and Dad's supplemental insurance provider. The paper at the top was an explanation of benefits, EOB, dated exactly 3 weeks after the surgery. My eyes casually scanned the columns of numbers, the itemized surgical costs, the room charges, the anesthesia fees. Then my gaze hit the bottom line. I froze. The air in the dusty office suddenly felt too thin to breathe. I traced my index finger across the faded black ink, my heart hammering a frantic, violent rhythm against my ribs. Total billed. 142.0 insurance covered. 142.00 patient responsibility. 00. I read it 3 times. The words began to warp and stretch in front of my eyes. Covered in full. $0 out of pocket. If Dad's surgery was completely covered by his insurance, where did my $50,000 go? Where was the hazard pay I had transferred? A cold, calculating clarity washed over me, instantly burning away the lingering sadness from the barbecue. I was no longer a grieving sister. I was a field-grade officer investigating a hostile breach. I pulled my secure laptop from my bag, connecting to a mobile hotspot. I did not need to ask Chloe for the truth. Liars only offer beautifully constructed fictions. I needed hard, undeniable data. I accessed the county clerk's public database. I searched Chloe's name, cross-referencing it with her boutique's LLC. The system buffered for a few agonizing seconds before populating a list of public financial records. I scrolled down to the dates matching 5 years ago, right around the time I was sitting in a bunker authorizing the wire transfer. There it was, a blinding, undeniable digital footprint. 3 months prior to Dad's surgery, the state of Ohio had placed a massive tax lien on Chloe's business for unpaid corporate taxes and penalties. The amount was staggering, enough to seize her home and bankrupt her completely. I looked at the date the lien was officially released, marked as paid in full. It was processed exactly 48 hours after my $50,000 cleared the blind trust account. The realization hit me with the force of a physical blow, leaving a sour, metallic taste of pure betrayal in my mouth. Chloe had not just mocked my physical scars. She had actively, maliciously orchestrated a lie about our father's impending death to steal my blood money. She had weaponized my love and my duty to save her own failing, superficial empire. And as I sat in the silent office, staring at the screen, an even darker, more terrifying question began to form in my mind. The money was wired directly to my parents' joint account for the hospital. Chloe could not have intercepted it alone. I slowly turned my head toward the closed door of the den. From the kitchen, I could hear the faint, cheerful hum of my mother washing dishes, completely unbothered. They knew. The floor beneath me felt as though it had completely given way. The enemy was not just at the barbecue. The enemy was inside the wire. The hallway leading from the dusty den to the brightly lit suburban kitchen felt like the longest stretch of enemy territory I had ever crossed. My combat boots made no sound against the thick, beige hallway runner, but the blood rushing in my ears was a deafening roar. In my left hand, I held the Manila folder containing the explanation of benefits and the freshly printed county tax records. The paper felt heavier than a loaded service weapon. I stopped just outside the kitchen archway, taking a singular, calculated breath. The air smelled of lemon dish soap and freshly brewed coffee, a sickeningly wholesome contrast to the profound betrayal I had just unearthed. My mother, Eleanor, stood at the porcelain sink, her back to me. She was methodically drying a pristine white ceramic plate with a floral tea towel, humming a soft, nameless tune. She looked like the absolute picture of maternal warmth, the kind of mother featured in television commercials for laundry detergent. It was a flawless, impenetrable disguise. I stepped into the kitchen. The linoleum floor creaked slightly under my weight. Eleanor turned around, offering that same fleeting, nervous smile she had worn since I arrived. She opened her mouth to ask if I wanted a refill on my coffee, but the words died in her throat the moment she registered the look on my face. You cannot spend 20 years commanding soldiers without learning how to weaponize your presence. I did not look like a helpful daughter anymore. I looked like a military interrogator who had just found the smoking gun. I walked slowly to the granite island in the center of the kitchen and tossed the manila folder onto the polished surface. The heavy paper slapped against the stone with a sharp, terrifying crack. I found the medical file from Dad's bypass surgery, I said. My voice was dangerously quiet, completely devoid of inflection. I also found the explanation of benefits. His procedure was fully covered by Medicare and his supplemental plan. The patient responsibility was exactly $0. Eleanor's hands stopped moving. The floral tea towel slipped from her grasp, pooling on the countertop. The color instantly drained from her face, leaving her skin looking like dry, ancient parchment. She stared at the folder, but did not make a single move to touch it. I was curious where my $50,000 went. I continued, taking a slow step closer to the island, keeping my eyes locked onto hers. So I ran a public records check. Exactly 48 hours after I wired my hazard pay into your joint checking account, the state of Ohio released a $50,000 tax lien on Chloe's boutique, a lien that was going to bankrupt her and take her house. The silence in the kitchen was absolute, broken only by the rhythmic, agonizing ticking of the decorative clock on the wall. I waited for her to deny it. I waited for her to act shocked, to tell me there had been a terrible administrative mistake, or to curse Chloe for intercepting the funds. But she did none of those things. Eleanor gripped the edge of the granite counter, her knuckles turning bone white, and she began to cry. They were not the loud, theatrical sobs Chloe used to manipulate a room. They were the quiet, pathetic tears of a woman who had finally been caught in a monstrous lie. "You have to understand, Sarah," Eleanor whispered, her voice trembling violently as she refused to meet my gaze. Chloe was about to lose absolutely everything. The state was going to seize the house. Jason had no money to lend her. And your father and I had leveraged our retirement. She was entirely desperate. She was talking about doing terrible things to herself. "So you lied to me," I stated, the coldness in my chest spreading into my limbs. "You told me Dad was dying and that the hospital was extorting you. You knew I was sitting in a combat zone, getting shot at, watching my own soldiers bleed in the sand. And you let me drain my savings to bail out your favorite child's failing business. You were always so strong." Eleanor suddenly cried out, her head snapping up, desperation making her voice shrill. "You were single. You had no children. You had the military covering your housing and your meals. You did not need the money the way she did. Chloe is fragile. She has always been fragile. We had to protect her. You were a soldier. You were built to handle the heavy lifting. You did not need us." The sheer, staggering weight of her justification hit me harder than any physical blow I had ever taken. I stared at the woman who had given birth to me, finally realizing the horrifying truth of my existence in this family. My independence, my discipline, and my success were not things they celebrated. They were the very things they used to penalize me, because I had built a stable, self-sufficient life. I was deemed acceptable collateral damage. I was expected to endlessly sacrifice my resources and my dignity to subsidize the incompetence of my siblings. To them, my strength was not a virtue. It was merely an unlimited resource for them to exploit. I am a soldier. Mom, I said softly, picking up the folder from the counter. And a soldier knows when a position is overrun. I am officially withdrawing my troops. I turned my back on her weeping figure, walking straight out the front door. I did not slam it. I simply closed it with a firm, decisive click, sealing the tomb of my childhood. I did not text them individually. I sent a single, sterile email to Chloe, Jason, and my parents, demanding their presence at a rented conference room in a neutral business center downtown. I specified that Marcus was required to attend. I arrived 30 minutes early, dressed in my Class A uniform, the dark green wool perfectly pressed, the silver oak leaves of my rank catching the harsh fluorescent light. This was not a family gathering. This was a formal decommissioning. When they filed into the room, the atmosphere was thick with suffocating tension. Chloe looked frantic, her eyes darting nervously around the windowless room. Jason looked annoyed, checking his expensive watch. Eleanor kept her head down, while my father, Thomas, looked pale and deeply ashamed. Marcus walked in last, his posture rigid, sensing the tactical shift in the environment immediately. I did not offer them water. I did not engage in small talk. I remained standing at the head of the long mahogany table. I opened my leather portfolio and slid 5 copies of the Medicare Explanation of Benefits, firmly stapled to the State of Ohio tax lien release, down the center of the table. 5 years ago, I began, my voice projecting with the practiced, undeniable authority of a military commander. I was told our father was dying. I wired $50,000 of combat hazard pay to save his life. The documents in front of you prove that his surgery was fully covered by insurance, and that my money was systematically diverted to pay off Chloe's corporate tax debt. The room erupted into absolute chaos. Jason gasped, looking at Chloe as if she were a stranger. Thomas buried his face in his hands, letting out a hollow, defeated groan. Chloe instantly sprang from her leather chair, her face flushed dark crimson, her manicured hands waving frantically in the air. That is a complete misunderstanding, Chloe shrieked, the panic stripping away her polished suburban accent. The hospital made a billing error initially, and then the money was already in the account, and the state was threatening to arrest me. Sarah, Mom and Dad said it was okay. We were going to pay you back. I swear we were, but then the economy tanked, and you never asked about it. Sit down, Chloe, a voice thundered from the back of the room. It was not my voice. It was Marcus. The retired Navy SEAL was staring at the documents on the table. His jaw clenched so tightly it looked as though his teeth might shatter. He looked up at his wife, and the expression of pure, unadulterated disgust on his face made Chloe freeze mid-sentence. You stole a combat veteran's hazard pay, Marcus said, his voice a lethal, vibrating whisper. You lied about your own father's heart failing. And you stole blood money to cover your own financial incompetence. And then you had the sheer, unforgivable audacity to mock her physical injuries on our patio. Chloe began to sob, reaching a trembling hand out toward her husband. But Marcus physically recoiled from her touch. He looked at me, a profound apology communicating silently across the room. He was a man of honor, and he had just realized he was married to a thief. I did not call you here to negotiate, I said, cutting through Chloe's theatrical weeping. I did not call you here to listen to your excuses, and I am certainly not here to demand an apology. I am here to formally sever the chain. I looked directly at my parents. I am stepping down as the emergency fund, the shock absorber, and the silent workhorse of this bloodline. I have accepted a promotion to full colonel, and my orders are transferring me to the Pentagon Regional Command in Colorado Springs. From this moment forward, my phone is disconnected. My financial accounts are secured. I no longer have a sister. I no longer have a brother. And I no longer have parents who view my strength as a green light for exploitation. I closed my leather portfolio, the snap echoing loudly in the silent room. I turned on my heel and walked out the heavy glass door, leaving them trapped in the terrifying reality of their own consequences. 3 years later, the brutal, biting cold of the Ohio suburbs was nothing more than a fading memory, replaced by the crisp, Restorative mountain air of Colorado. I was 41 years old, wearing the silver eagle of a colonel on my collar. I was sitting on the wooden porch of my cabin overlooking the Rockies, sipping hot coffee. A man named David, a civilian architect who viewed my scarred arm as a symbol of profound bravery rather than an ugly blemish, was inside cooking breakfast. I was deeply, undeniably happy. The heavy armor I had worn my entire life had finally been set aside. The mail had arrived earlier that morning. Among the bills and catalogs was a thick, handwritten envelope. I recognized the elegant, looping handwriting immediately. It was from Chloe. I opened it cautiously. Inside was a cashier's check made out to me for exactly $10,000 and a single sheet of stationery. Sarah, the letter read, I am not writing to ask for your forgiveness because I have not yet earned it. Marcus stayed, but only on the condition of absolute transparency and intensive therapy. We sold the big house. We downsized. I got a normal job. I am learning how to actually work for a living. I am so deeply sorry that I punished you for the incredible strength I secretly wished I possessed. This check is the first installment of my debt. I will pay back every single cent. You are my hero. Sarah, I hope one day, years from now, I can earn the right to simply be your sister again. I stared at the paper as the morning sun broke over the mountain peaks, casting a warm, golden light across the timber deck. I did not feel the urge to call her. The boundary remained firmly in place, protecting my peace. But for the first time in my adult life, I did not feel the heavy, toxic anchor of resentment weighing down my chest. I endorsed the $10,000 check and slid it into an envelope addressed to a national charity for wounded combat veterans. I took a deep breath of the freezing mountain air, feeling the absolute, undeniable grace of true liberation. I had not just survived the fire of my family's betrayal. I had walked out of the ashes completely whole, building a completely new life from the shattered. Smoking remnants of your old one is not a cinematic montage of instant triumphs. It is a slow, deliberate, and often incredibly painful process of unlearning decades of toxic programming. When I first arrived in Colorado Springs to take up my new post at the Pentagon Regional Command, the silence of my existence was almost deafening. For 38 years, my nervous system had been permanently wired to anticipate the next family crisis, the next frantic phone call, and the next subtle insult I was expected to swallow to keep the peace. In the crisp, high-altitude air of the Rocky Mountains, there were absolutely no fabricated emergencies. There was only the rigorous, structured discipline of my military career and the sprawling, untouched wilderness that surrounded my secluded timber cabin. As a newly minted full colonel, my daily life was consumed by strategic planning, complex logistics, and collaborating with commanding officers who evaluated me strictly on my merit, my intellect, and my undeniable resilience. In the heavily secured briefing rooms of the regional command, there were no manipulative tears or weaponized guilt trips to navigate. Strength was universally respected, not exploited as a boundless, free resource. The stark, undeniable contrast between my professional environment, where integrity was the absolute baseline, and my family dynamic, where deceit was the primary currency, forced me to confront the profound depth of the emotional abuse I had endured. I had to learn how to exist without being a convenient shield for someone else's incompetence. I had to painfully accept that my intrinsic value was not directly tied to my utility in solving other people's manufactured disasters. This vital, psychological transition was anchored by the unexpected presence of David. We met not in a dramatic, sweeping romance, but in the quiet, steady environment of a local charity board for wounded veterans, where he routinely volunteered his architectural skills to design fully accessible housing. David was a civilian, completely removed from the rigid hierarchy and intense culture of the military. Yet he possessed a quiet, unshakable integrity that reminded me of the very best soldiers I had ever commanded. He did not treat me like a broken hero who desperately needed saving. Nor did he expect me to constantly perform the exhausted role of the invulnerable, emotionless warrior. He simply saw me as an absolute equal. I vividly remember the first time he asked about the massive, jagged scar that aggressively covered my left arm. We were sitting by the stone fireplace in his living room, watching the heavy winter snow bury the pine trees outside the windows. He did not flinch. He did not offer hollow, uncomfortable pity. And he certainly did not ask me to cover it up to preserve a superficial aesthetic. He gently traced the harsh ridges of the burned and grafted tissue with his fingertips, his touch filled with profound reverence, and quietly told me that it was the most beautiful map of courage he had ever seen. In that singular, quiet moment, years of internalized shame intentionally planted and cultivated by Chloe and Jason simply evaporated into the warmth of the fire. David provided a safe, unwavering harbor where I was finally allowed to be vulnerable without the terrifying, paralyzing fear that my vulnerability would be immediately weaponized against me. Over the next 3 years, the tangible proof of my family's forced evolution continued to arrive in my mailbox every 6 months, with absolute, unyielding precision. A thick envelope bearing a suburban Ohio postmark would appear in the heavy iron mailbox at the end of my long gravel driveway. Inside, there was always a cashier's check for exactly $10,000, accompanied by a brief, incredibly polite, and highly restricted note from Chloe. The letters never begged for a tearful reconciliation, nor did they attempt to cross the firm, uncompromising boundary I had established in that sterile conference room years prior. They simply provided a factual, objective update on her grueling journey toward personal accountability. Through these brief dispatches, I learned that she was working 40 hours a week as a mid-level manager at a regional logistics firm, driving a reliable, used sedan, and attending intensive psychotherapy sessions twice a week. Marcus had stayed with her, enforcing a rigid, uncompromising framework of honesty that she was desperately trying to live up to. Jason, completely cut off from the financial safety nets he had historically abused, had allegedly been forced to declare bankruptcy and was working a grueling manual labor job to slowly dig himself out of massive debt. My parents had been forced to downsize their lifestyle, finally facing the reality of their own enabling behavior. I read these updates with a profound, detached calmness. I did not write back. I did not call to offer congratulations or ease their guilt. I simply endorsed each $10,000 check and mailed it directly to the veterans' charity. The universe has a brilliant, poetic way of balancing its scales. The hazard pay that was stolen through a cowardly lie was systematically being returned, only to be redirected to the brave men and women who actually understood the true, devastating cost of sacrifice. If you are listening to this story right now, whether you are sitting in your living room, commuting to work, or simply taking a quiet, stolen moment for yourself, I want you to pause and absorb a vital, unshakable truth about family, loyalty, and the boundaries of your own heart, society, culture, and generations of deeply ingrained expectations frequently teach women that our ultimate value lies in our capacity to endlessly sacrifice ourselves for the comfort and convenience of others. We are relentlessly conditioned to believe that blood relations demand unconditional tolerance, that turning the other cheek is a sign of moral superiority, and that stepping away from a toxic family member is an act of unforgivable selfishness. I am here to tell you, from the absolute bottom of my scarred and healed heart, that this is a dangerous, manipulative lie designed to keep you subservient. True love, whether it is familial, romantic, or platonic, must absolutely be rooted in fundamental, unwavering respect. If your presence at the table is only valued because of what you can seamlessly provide, what you can quietly fix, or what financial burdens you can absorb, you are not being loved. You are being managed. You are being exploited. And nobody, absolutely regardless of the DNA you happen to share, has the inherent right to use your strength, your independence, or your hard-earned financial stability as an excuse to systematically abuse you. The concept of financial abuse within family structures is an insidious, devastating reality that incredibly often hides behind the highly emotional guise of sudden family emergencies, unexpected illnesses, or unavoidable tragic circumstances. It intentionally weaponizes your empathy, your profound sense of duty, and your inherent goodness directly against you. When my sister orchestrated a massive, theatrical lie about our father's medical bills to completely drain my combat pay, she did not just steal money. She actively attempted to steal the value of my life's work, assuming I would simply absorb the crushing loss to keep the fragile family peace intact. You must vigorously protect your assets, demand transparent, verifiable documentation, and absolutely never feel a single ounce of guilt for verifying the truth when someone demands your resources. Your generosity is a beautiful gift, an absolute privilege that must be earned, not a loaded weapon that can be continuously turned against you. We frequently trap ourselves in the exhausting, relentless role of the strong one, the dependable family workhorse who will seamlessly absorb the devastating shockwaves of everybody else's poor, reckless decisions. But we fail to realize that by constantly functioning as the ultimate safety net, we actively prevent our toxic family members from ever facing the necessary, painful consequences of their own actions. When you courageously remove the safety net of your own endless sacrifice, you forcefully compel them to learn how to stand on their own 2 feet, or to fall entirely on their own merits. My sister's redemption, her incredibly painful journey toward becoming a decent, honest human being, was only made possible because I permanently and unapologetically removed myself from her life. My absolute absence was the necessary catalyst for her forced evolution. Healing from this kind of profound, foundational betrayal is a quiet, ongoing revolution of the soul. It is the conscious, daily decision to wake up every single morning and choose your own peace over their chaotic, unreasonable demands. It is the brilliant realization that equality isn't just a political concept reserved for the corporate workplace or the voting booth. It is a rigid standard that absolutely must begin at your own kitchen table. Whether you are a dedicated stay-at-home mother expertly managing a complex household, a high-powered corporate executive leading a massive team, or a soldier wearing a uniform in a hostile combat zone, your intrinsic worth is absolute, completely non-negotiable, and entirely independent of how useful you are to your family's selfish agenda. You are allowed to be happy. You are allowed to walk away from tables where respect is no longer being served. You are absolutely allowed to fiercely protect the beautiful, hard-won life you have built from the ashes of their betrayal. Now I want to hear directly from you, the incredible women listening to this message. Have you ever found yourself trapped in the agonizing position of being the family workhorse, quietly carrying the crushing weight of everyone else's responsibilities? Have you ever had to draw a hard, uncompromising line with the people you love the most? And exactly how did you finally find the incredible courage to walk away and choose yourself? Please share your personal stories, your ongoing struggles, and your brilliant victories in the comments section down below. I promise you that I read every single one of your comments, and this channel has become an incredible, vital community of strong, resilient women who are here to support, uplift, and completely validate you. If my personal journey resonated with you today, if it sparked a realization or offered a much-needed moment of comfort in a dark time, please hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and share this video with someone who might desperately need a reminder of their own unyielding strength. Never apologize for demanding respect. Protect your peace fiercely, and always remember to know your worth. Until next time, stay strong, stay vigilant, and take care of yourselves. The passage of time is a fascinating, silent architect. It does not erase the past, but it steadily builds a vast, formidable distance between who you once were and who you have fought so incredibly hard to become. 5 exact years had passed since that suffocating, windowless conference room in Ohio where I formally severed the toxic chain of my bloodline, the harsh, biting memories of Chloe's theatrical weeping, Jason's arrogant sneers, and my parents' cowardly enabling had slowly faded into the background noise of a previous lifetime. It was late November in Colorado, the week of Thanksgiving. A heavy, pristine blanket of white snow had fallen overnight, completely burying the rugged landscape of the Rocky Mountains and transforming the dense pine forests into a silent, glittering sanctuary. I was now 43 years old, standing in the expansive, warm kitchen of the custom timber frame home that David and I had built together. We had been married for 2 years. A quiet, profoundly intimate ceremony conducted on a mountain ridge, entirely devoid of family drama, passive-aggressive remarks, or the exhausting performance of suburban perfection. Our home smelled of roasting turkey, fresh rosemary, and the rich, comforting scent of burning cedar wood from the massive stone fireplace. It was the absolute antithesis of my sister's manufactured patio barbecues. Here, there was no aesthetic to aggressively maintain, no fragile egos to protect, and absolutely no invisible ledgers of emotional debt. The morning mail had been delayed by the heavy snowfall, but the rural carrier eventually made his way up our long, winding gravel driveway. David walked outside to retrieve the bundle, his boots crunching loudly in the fresh snow, and returned with a cold, damp stack of envelopes. He handed them to me with a warm, knowing smile, kissing the side of my head before returning to the stove to check on the holiday preparations. I sifted through the generic holiday catalogs and utility bills until my fingers paused on a thick, familiar envelope. It bore the same Ohio postmark, the same elegant, looping handwriting that had arrived every 6 months like clockwork. But this envelope felt distinctly different. It carried the undeniable weight of finality. I walked over to the large bay window overlooking the snow-covered valley, taking a slow, steadying breath of the cedar-scented air, and carefully tore the envelope open. Inside was a cashier's check for exactly $10,000. It was the fifth check, the final installment, the absolute conclusion of the $50,000 blood money that had been stolen from me under the circumstances of a fabricated medical emergency. Attached to the check was a single, crisp sheet of white stationery. I unfolded it, my hands completely steady, completely free of the trembling anxiety that used to paralyze me whenever my family reached out. Sarah, the letter read, with this check, the financial debt I owe you is finally, officially paid in full. I know with absolute certainty that the emotional debt, the profound damage I inflicted upon you out of my own pathetic, desperate insecurity, can never truly be repaid. Marcus and I are still together, but it has been the hardest 5 years of my life. Learning how to look at my own reflection without lying about the woman staring back at me. Dad passed away peacefully last month. Mom is living in a small assisted care facility. I am managing her care, just as I should have done all those years ago, instead of demanding you carry the burden. I did not call you about Dad's funeral because I wanted to completely respect the boundary you set. I did not want to invade your peace or manipulate your grief. I am finally learning how to carry my own weight. You saved my life, Sarah, not by giving me that money, but by forcing me to face the absolute devastation of my own actions. I wish you nothing but the deepest, most beautiful happiness. I read the words twice, the silence of the snow-covered mountains echoing the profound stillness in my own chest. There was no sudden, dramatic wave of grief regarding my father's passing. The man I knew had effectively died the day I realized he was willing to let me bleed to subsidize a lie. There was only a quiet, gentle release, like the final exhalation of a breath I had been holding for decades. Chloe had actually done the impossible. She had fundamentally changed. She had respected the boundary. She had taken accountability. And yet, I still felt absolutely no desire to invite her back into my life. Forgiveness does not mandate reconciliation. You can fully forgive someone from a safe, heavily fortified distance while simultaneously recognizing that they no longer belong in your future. I endorsed the final check, sealing it in an envelope destined for the Wounded Veterans Charity, officially closing the darkest chapter of my history. That evening, Our heavy wooden dining table was crowded with life, laughter, and the beautiful, undeniable warmth of a chosen family. The chairs were filled with fellow military officers who understood the silent language of sacrifice, David's incredibly kind and fiercely supportive siblings, and close friends who valued authenticity over appearance. As I reached across the table to pass a platter of roasted vegetables, the sleeve of my sweater pulled back, revealing the thick, jagged ridges of the massive burn scar on my left arm. Nobody flinched. Nobody looked away in disgust. Nobody asked me to cover it up to preserve the aesthetic of the holiday dinner. David caught my eye from across the table, offering a subtle, loving wink, his gaze filled with nothing but absolute, unwavering adoration. I smiled, a genuine radiant smile that reached the very corners of my eyes. I was entirely surrounded by people who loved me not for what I could fix, not for what I could endlessly endure, but simply for exactly who I was. The war was officially over. The debts were permanently settled, and the breathtaking peace I had fought so fiercely to secure was finally, completely mine. 2 years after that definitive Thanksgiving, the grueling, relentless trajectory of my military career reached an absolute pinnacle that few soldiers ever dare to imagine, let alone achieve. I was 45 years old, standing in the center of a grand, historically rich auditorium at the Pentagon. The massive room was filled with hundreds of the highest-ranking military officials in the nation, a sea of immaculate dress uniforms, gleaming brass, and a profound, suffocating gravity that only exists in the corridors of ultimate strategic power. The air smelled of polished leather, heavy wool, and the subtle, sharp scent of industrial floor wax. I was not there to observe. I was there to receive the singular, heavy silver star of a brigadier general. Out of the thousands of officers who commission into the United States Army, only a microscopic fraction ever ascend to the elite ranks of general officers. It is a terrifying, magnificent transition from a tactical leader into a grand strategic commander. As I stood at the rigid position of attention, staring straight ahead at the massive American flag draped behind the podium, the sheer, staggering weight of the moment settled over my shoulders like a physical mantle. The traditional pinning ceremony is heavily steeped in profound personal significance. Historically, a newly promoted general officer has their closest family members approach the stage to pin the new rank insignia onto their shoulders. It is meant to be a public, powerful acknowledgement of the sacrifices the family has endured to support the soldier's career. As the Chief of Staff of the Army called my name, my voice echoing off the vaulted ceilings, the audience erupted into a thunderous, respectful applause. I stepped forward to the center of the polished wooden stage. There was no manipulative sister sitting in the front row, pretending to be the supportive sibling, while secretly harboring bitter resentment. There was no enabling mother weeping theatrical tears for the cameras. There was no brother masking his deep insecurities behind a hollow, arrogant smirk. My biological family's chairs were completely, intentionally empty, and that emptiness was not a tragedy. It was the ultimate, undisputed victory of my existence. Instead, it was David who proudly walked up the carpeted steps of the stage. He looked incredibly handsome in a tailored, dark navy civilian suit, his eyes shining with a fiercely protective pride that completely anchored me to the earth. Joining him was Colonel Evelyn Dana, the very same commanding officer who, years ago, had delivered that brutal, necessary wake-up call in the freezing hospital hallway, forcefully demanding that I stop using my family's incompetence as a cowardly shield against my own massive potential. Together, the man who had completely healed my heart and the woman who had fiercely championed my career stood on either side of me. With absolute, meticulous precision, they removed the silver eagles of a colonel from my uniform and firmly pressed the heavy, brilliant silver stars of a brigadier general into the dark green wool of my epaulets. The cold metal pressed against my collarbones, a heavy, permanent reminder of the absolute authority and crushing responsibility I had earned through decades of unyielding discipline. When the ceremony concluded and the massive reception hall began to fill with the low, steady hum of congratulations and clinking glasses, I found a quiet, secluded moment near a towering window overlooking the Potomac River. The afternoon sun was beginning to set, casting a long, golden light across the water, reflecting the profound, hard-won-sea serenity in my own soul. I looked down at my left arm. I had chosen to wear the short-sleeved version of the dress uniform shirt under my jacket, and as I adjusted my cuffs, the thick, uneven, beautifully chaotic ridges of the Black Eagle scar caught the fading sunlight. For decades, I had been completely conditioned to view this mark as an ugly, unfortunate tragedy. My family had weaponized it, using it as a convenient, disgusting punchline to actively diminish my power and elevate their own shallow, pathetic lives. They wanted me to believe that a woman's worth was entirely dictated by her pristine, untouched aesthetic, completely ignoring the absolute, terrifying reality of what it actually takes to survive the darkest corners of this world. But looking at it now, framed by the gleaming silver star on my shoulder, I finally understood the ultimate, undeniable truth of its legacy. The scar was not a blemish. It was a profound, indisputable map of my absolute sovereignty. It was the physical evidence that I had possessed the sheer, terrifying courage to reach into the burning wreckage, not just in the sweltering, hostile deserts of Afghanistan, but in the suffocating, toxic ruins of my own family and drag myself out alive. I had ruthlessly cut away the diseased, Paris elements of my bloodline to save the host. I had refused to be the silent, suffering workhorse for people who treated my hazard pay like a slush fund and my trauma like a social inconvenience. I had drawn an immovable line in the sand, and when they arrogantly tried to cross it, I had simply walked away and conquered the absolute pinnacle of my profession. I raised my glass of sparkling water in a quiet, solitary toast to the blazing, magnificent fire that had forged me, to the incredible, chosen family that had expertly healed me, and to the breathtaking, undeniable freedom of a life lived entirely on my own uncompromising terms. The view from a brigadier general's office at the Pentagon is designed to be intimidating, offering a sweeping, monumental perspective of the nation's capital. But I often found my attention drawn inward, observing the intricate human machinery that kept the military functioning. With the heavy silver stars now firmly anchored to my shoulders, my sphere of influence had expanded exponentially. I was no longer just managing tactical deployments or regional logistics. I was actively shaping the careers, the mental resilience, and the future of the junior officers serving under my command. It was in this sprawling, high-stakes environment that I first noticed Captain Emily Hayes. Emily was a brilliant, fiercely dedicated 28-year-old logistics officer. Her service record was absolutely flawless, characterized by a sharp, analytical mind and an unyielding work ethic. However, over the course of 3 weeks, I watched a dark, familiar shadow begin to consume her. The crisp precision of her uniform started to slip. The dark, bruising bags of chronic exhaustion settled permanently under her eyes. During high-level strategic briefings, her usually razor-sharp focus would drift, her hands discreetly trembling as she compulsively checked her muted cell phone. I did not need a medical degree to diagnose her condition. I recognized the devastating, suffocating symptoms of a soldier who was fighting a brutal, invisible war on the home front. I requested Captain Hayes to report to my office late on a Friday afternoon, long after the civilian contractors had cleared out for the weekend. When she walked through the heavy oak doors, she looked terrified, standing at rigid attention and bracing herself for a severe professional reprimand. I did not sit behind my massive, intimidating mahogany desk. Instead, I directed her to the small, comfortable seating area situated near the windows. I poured her a cup of black coffee, handed it to her, and sat across from her with a quiet, disarming calmness. I did not ask her about the minor clerical errors she had made that week. I looked directly into her exhausted, panicked eyes and asked her exactly how much money her family's currently trying to extract from her. Emily froze. The coffee spilled slightly over the rim of the ceramic mug, burning her hand, but she did not even flinch. The heavy, impenetrable fortress of her military discipline instantly crumbled, and she began to weep with the sheer, agonizing relief of finally being seen. Over the next hour, the ugly, entirely predictable truth poured out of her. Emily had just returned from a highly lucrative, hazard pay deployment. Almost immediately, her mother and older brother had manufactured a catastrophic financial emergency regarding a supposed foreclosure on the family home. They were relentlessly demanding that Emily drain her deployment savings, weaponizing her guilt, leveraging her loyalty, and aggressively accusing her of being a selfish, arrogant daughter who had abandoned her family for the military. As I listened to the frantic, desperate cadence of her voice, the ghosts of my own past materialized in the room. I saw the ghost of Chloe standing on that suburban patio. I felt the phantom weight of the $50,000 wire transfer that had nearly destroyed my own future. When Emily finally finished speaking, her head bowed in profound shame, I reached into the bottom drawer of my desk. I pulled out a framed, faded photocopy of the explanation of benefits and the State of Ohio tax lien release, the very same documents that had liberated me a decade ago. I slid the frame across the glass coffee table. I commanded Emily to look at it, and in a quiet, steady voice, I told her the entire, unvarnished story of my father's fabricated heart surgery, my sister's monumental theft, and the suffocating conspiracy of silence that my parents had actively maintained. I watched Emily's eyes widen in absolute shock as she realized that the brigadier general sitting across from her, a woman who commanded immense strategic power, had once been the exact same exploited, terrified workhorse that she was right now. I leaned forward, my voice dropping to a tone of absolute, uncompromising authority. I told her that she was not permitted to set herself on fire simply to keep her toxic, financially irresponsible family warm. I gave her a direct, tactical blueprint for survival. Freeze her accounts. Demand legally binding documentation from the bank regarding the alleged foreclosure. And completely cease all communications until the verified truth was established. I watched the profound, vital transformation happen in real time. The crushing weight of the manufactured guilt visibly lifted from her shoulders, replaced by the cold, hard steel of military discipline. By sharing the deepest, most painful wound of my past, I had actively broken the cycle of abuse for the next generation, proving that the highest form of leadership is teaching your soldiers how to fiercely protect their own humanity. The beautiful, redeeming power of time is that it allows you to aggressively reclaim the very concepts that were once used to destroy you. It was mid-July, precisely 10 years to the week since Chloe and Jason had humiliated me on their pristine suburban patio. But I was not in Ohio. I was standing in the sprawling, sun-drenched backyard of my Colorado home, the majestic, snow-capped peaks of the Rocky Mountains framing the brilliant blue sky. David was standing by a massive, custom-built stone grill, the rich, mouth-watering scent of smoking cedar wood and roasting meats filling the crisp mountain air. We were hosting our annual summer barbecue, but the fundamental architecture of this gathering was a complete, triumphant inversion of the toxic nightmare I had walked away from a decade ago. There were no fragile egos desperately demanding validation, no passive-aggressive whispers, and absolutely no invisible ledgers of emotional debt. The sprawling wooden deck was crowded with the beautiful, chaotic, and genuine laughter of our chosen family. Captain Emily Hayes was there, now wearing the gold oak leaf of a major, laughing brightly as she chased her rescued dog across the manicured grass. She had followed the tactical blueprint, uncovered her family's massive financial lies, successfully protected her assets, and built a stunning, independent life entirely on her own terms. As I walked through the crowd, holding a simple glass of iced tea, I was wearing a sleeveless summer dress. The thick, jagged, aggressive ridges of the black eagle scar on my left arm were completely exposed to the bright Colorado sun. I did not cross my arms to hide it. I did not feel the sudden, paralyzing urge to fetch a cardigan to appease the aesthetic sensibilities of the guests. The people surrounding me did not view my scarred flesh as a disgusting inconvenience. They recognized it as the undeniable, physical manifestation of the fierce, unyielding protective instinct that defined my character. David caught my eye through the smoke of the grill, raising his tongs in a silent, loving salute. In that precise, golden moment, surrounded by the towering pines and the people who valued my absolute authenticity over my utility, I realized that I had not just survived the war, I had definitively, spectacularly won it. I had successfully replaced the suffocating prison of blood obligation with the expansive, breathtaking freedom of chosen loyalty. If you are listening to this story as it comes to a close, I want to leave you with one final, urgent directive. The world is filled with individuals who will gladly build their own comfortable empires on top of your silent, agonizing sacrifices. They will use the sacred concepts of family, duty, and love as heavy, blunt instruments to keep you compliant, constantly demanding that you shrink yourself to accommodate their massive insecurities. You must realize that your capacity to endure pain is not a moral obligation to accept abuse. The moment you stop functioning as the emotional and financial shock absorber for the toxic people in your life, they will inevitably accuse you of being cold, selfish, and ruthless. Let them. Let them hurl their baseless insults from the smoking ruins of their own manufactured disasters. Your peace, your financial security, and your profound mental health are infinitely more valuable than their fragile, conditional approval. You have the absolute right to demand transparency, to fiercely protect the resources you have bled to accumulate, and to walk away from any table where your fundamental dignity is no longer being served. Never forget that the strongest, most impenetrable boundaries are not built from anger. They are built from a deep, radical, and unapologetic self-love. If this story has ignited a spark within you today, if it has given you the sudden, necessary courage to finally look at your own bank accounts, your own relationships, and your own family dynamics with a critical, uncompromising eye, I need you to take action. Hit the like button to support this message. Subscribe to the channel to join this incredible community of resilient, independent women. And share this video with someone who desperately needs permission to finally choose themselves. I want you to go down into the comments right now and declare the boundary you are going to set today. I read every single one of them, and I am standing right here on the front lines with you. Protect your peace, secure your future, and never, ever apologize for knowing exactly what you are worth. Until next time, stay strong, stay vigilant, and absolutely refuse to settle. As we reach the end of this journey, I want you to take a deep breath and really absorb the absolute truth of what happened here today. Society spends a tremendous amount of time telling women, especially those of us who silently carry the heavy loads, that we must forgive and tolerate absolutely anything, simply because someone happens to share our DNA. But this story is not just about a ruined suburban barbecue or a stolen $50,000. It is a profound, urgent lesson about the insidious nature of financial and emotional abuse that hides perfectly behind the guise of family emergencies. My sister weaponized my loyalty. She used my father's health as a hostage to fund her own massive mistakes, fully assuming that my independence and my military strength meant I could just quietly absorb the crushing loss. How many of you listening right now are doing exactly that? How many of you are constantly absorbing the devastating shockwaves of your family's reckless decisions, secretly believing that your endless sacrifice makes you a good daughter, a good sister, or a good person? It does not. It is a trap. True love and family loyalty must be rooted in absolute respect, transparency, and mutual accountability. When you continuously act as the eternal safety net for people who absolutely refuse to stand on their own 2 feet, you are not saving them. You are actively allowing them to destroy your future. The most powerful, heroic thing I ever did in my life was not dragging my soldiers from a burning vehicle in the desert. It was looking at the very people who raised me and finally saying, No more. You are allowed to demand absolute financial transparency from the people you help. You are allowed to firmly lock the door to your hard-earned life. Your immense capacity to endure pain is not a green light for toxic people to continually abuse you. When you finally find the courage to cut the suffocating cord of toxic family obligation, you make room for a beautiful, chosen family that loves you entirely for who you are, not just for the bills you can pay. This content has been meticulously researched, constructed, and manually edited by our team to bring you profound meaning and valuable life lessons.